Welcome back to my channel. What I have here is a Scheppach wet wheel. It's a grinding machine. I'm sure those of you that are watching this know all about it. It comes with an 8-inch wheel. I have used this in the workshop quite a bit. When I first got it, I ground all my planes, all my chisels, pretty much everything that I could think of, and the 8-inch wheel has now been reduced to just over 7.5, fractionally over 7.5, so it's had quite a bit of wear. I didn't find that it was particularly easy to use. Right off the bat, when I put the wheel in, if I lay the chisel against it, the chisel was sort of moving up and down, which told me that the wheel was out of true. That was from the factory. I would have thought at least they would have had the wheels trued up at the factory. But I went ahead and used it for a while, and then I bought this wheel flattening or truing jig. So I trued the wheel up once. I wasn't that impressed with it. Admittedly, the wheel by that point was quite out of true, and I had to do a number of passes, setting it progressively lower as I went across. But it doesn't move easily. I wouldn't say that it was a sort of user-friendly sort of arrangement. The thing that I found the most annoying about this machine is that this bar from which everything is attached, and presumably everything from this bar needs to be 90 degrees to the wheel in order to get a flat edge across the front of your chisels. This bar is held in place by 2 clamps, and there's absolutely no reason why this couldn't be pointing up or pointing down or twisted in some way. There's no precision guiding at the point of entry into the machine over here. So what you have to do, not that they mention this, but it seems to me that it's imperative that you do it, is you get yourself some kind of square and you offer it to the side of the wheel and move it up to the bottom of the bar, and at that point you can adjust these screws, lifting it or dropping it, so you get it absolutely 90 degrees to the side of the wheel, and that at least is a reference point, at which point then you'd need to true up the wheel so it's flat across the surface and 90 degrees to the side, which is what should happen theoretically. The wheel is pretty much 90 degrees to the side, I will say that much, having done it this way. It's not bad. See there, for example, it's actually slightly lower here, but it's reasonable enough. I'm going to switch it on. You can see it's running fairly true, but it does appear to be slightly concaved in the centre, just a fraction. And I'm not sure that the truing jig is going to help me with that. Now what Scheppach recommend at this point to get rid of these scores in the wheel is to use something like this, which they provide with the machine. It's like a oil stone really. It has a very rough side and a smoother side. And what they're suggesting is that you manually apply this stone to the wheel while it's turning, and it literally grinds these marks out. Another thought I had was, could I use something like this, which is a diamond truing device. This is a Silverline one, I think it was about £7. If I was to hold this up, what would happen? And I thought I'd give that a try first. Well, the first thing I noticed is that it's picking up from both the outer edges, which is interesting. I think it's true to say that they are fractionally higher than the centre. you'd expect, these lines here are moving from both sides towards the centre, which would make sense if it's sort of bringing this down to a flat wheel. Let's try again. I'm not pushing very hard. Right, and now it seems to be scoring slightly. It's looking quite flat though. I would say that's really quite flat. It also seems to be at 90 degrees to the side, so I think maybe that's okay, but I do have some score marks in it, so what I'm going to do is fill it full of water and try to apply this and see how that works. I decided not to put water in it. I thought I'd try it dry so that we can actually see what's going on, because if it's wet you won't see any of the score marks. Now I do see cutting marks from the truing tool all the way across there. Actually, I'll start with the rough side and see what happens. I'll go very gently. Hard to tell really. Just keep going. Well, that's something weird's going on there. It started to kick and I don't know what that was all about. I don't know if it was that catch there. Okay, now I'm going to switch to the soft side. Okay, well I would say that's most of the marks out. Whether it's still true or not, I don't know. Let's just check for 90 degrees. Yeah, what I can see is that I've worn a bit too much away here on the side. So if you use the truing tool, you'll get a flat line all the way across with ribs. And if you start using this, the chances are of keeping this absolutely square to the wheel are quite remote. Just your natural hand motion, just the human error is going to tip it one way or the other, in which case I've taken a bit more off this edge here. So now this is slightly out of true, just from about here to the edge. It's just slightly, it's running off slightly. Anyway, I suppose there's no perfection with this, it's just sort of a bit hit and miss. This is why what I really use this for is just for taking away the bulk on a chisel, just to get the first angle on the chisel, and then for the front edge I'm more likely to use a hand stone, or I might start the front edge on here and then finish it on a proper oil stone or a water stone if you have one. So I've got a gauge here. I've got my hand on the base because it's a magnetic base, and I have a wooden platform, not a metal one. Right, so I've got a marker, a little piece of tape stuck to the wheel. I'm at 0. I'm going to move it around 1 revolution. So you can see it's just sort of fluctuating a few thousandths of an inch. And then it starts to pull away. We're about 3 thousandths, 4 thousandths. So wiggling it so it settles. 4 thousandths, 3. It's going back to 0. And then it's gone minus 3 thousandths, and then it's back to where it started. So that tells me that we went plus 4, 5, minus 3, so there's about 8 thousandths of an inch out of true here. I'll try the same thing in the centre. Right, here we go. It's a couple of thousandths that we're starting to move here. A couple of thousandths off the 0. It's got minus 2, minus 2. And we're back to where we started. So we've got 3 or 4 thousandths there. I'm going to move it right to the edge. Right, here we go, one last time. Two thousandths, 3, minus 2, almost minus 4, and we're back. So it looks to me like we've got about 8 thousandths of an inch out of true. So does any of that matter? I'm not sure. 8 thousandths of an inch from a center point, 4 one way, 4 the other. I'm not sure if that's that critical on this kind of work. Basically we're honing a bevel on a chisel. What really matters is the front edge which comes in contact with the wood. So it's inconclusive as far as I'm concerned. Another thing that bothers me about these this particular model is these plastic bushings here are really rubbish. They're extremely thin, and this is quite rough. It's a sort of galvanized bar, stop it rusting, but I wouldn't say it's very smooth. You might want to lubricate it with something, but I can see score marks already on the inside here on both of these from it moving sideways. Obviously you put a bit of pressure down on the wheel, not too much, but there is some pressure pulling this up. It moves, you know, so worrying about truing the wheel and making sure the wheel is perfect, you've got a jig here that moves, it wobbles. So the play in that is probably a lot more than 8 thousandths of an inch, so that doesn't help. I'd be inclined to have something that was a little bit better than this. This is not what I call very precision. That would be another criticism. I find this jig here, it's designed for setting the angles on the chisels. To be honest, it's really, it's plaggy, it's cheap, it's, you know, it's not great. It's very hard to line a chisel up from a small point like this because any angle of the chisel is going to change. It's very hard to get it absolutely right. It's got some information on it which is at best a bit confusing. So it's saying you've got two different chisels and plane blades. It's suggesting 30 degrees, and then you have to look and it says that's 30 degrees there. So you lay this chisel in there, and I'm nowhere near 30 on that, weirdly enough. I would say I'm more like, but then again it's really hard to know, because this is rocking slightly. Am I in the right place or not, you know? So not great. I think I'm more like 25, maybe 26 degrees. There's a 25 here. Let's have a look. Yeah, actually I'm more 25 than 30. I don't know how much difference that really makes. So this is disappointing. I'm sure there's better ones out there for this sort of thing. So I've got a nice Sorby chisel here. I want to grind. I want to get a 30-degree bevel on it. So you slip it here behind the gauge, behind the jig. Then you take this jig here, or this gauge, and you find the 30-degree setting. Which is this one. You rest it on the wheel, you bring the chisel forward, and then you bring the two together, and what you're trying to do effectively is to get the back of the chisel lined up with this flat plastic part of the jig. So you can kind of rock it into place. It kind of locks almost when it's in place, and then looking straight down on it, you have to try to get this 90 degrees with the wheel, because if you don't, you'll cut the end of the chisel at a funny angle. And then just torque it down with these two screws. Again, a little bit primitive, it's just being held by this metal clamp. So before I grind, I like to take this part of a combination square, just take the ruler out, it gets in the way, rest it on the back of the jig, slide it over to the chisel, and make sure that you've got a 90 degrees there, which I do have. That's assuming, of course, all this is square, but that's all you've got to work with. So when I'm completely satisfied, I just tighten it down and just check, looking underneath here, just checking that the back of the chisel is laying flat on this plate here. Because if you tighten one down too much, it can tip the chisel to one side. You tighten this one, it will tip it the other way. So as far as I'm aware, at this point in time, I'm 90 degrees to the jig is 90 degrees to the wheel. This was the bit I was not satisfied with these bearings, because if I can wiggle this about, as you can see, and it's quite likely you'll do that. I mean, what I'll probably end up doing is just putting forward force so that the back of the bearing is pushing against the bar, and try to stop it from sort of wiggling like that. But every time that wiggles, it means you're not getting a flat cut. So, you know, precision. I just pour some water in. You can see there's a notch here which stops you overfilling it. If you put too much in, it just pours out the edge. Pours out here all over the table. Not such a good thing. I'm just turning this to let the stone absorb the water. You can see how far it's got. Give it a few minutes. I forgot to mention that on this jig there is actually two bits that stick up here in the metal, so that if you push the tool that you're sharpening flat against them, that is supposed to give you a 90-degree angle to the wheel, and it seems to do that, to be honest. I don't see any reason why that's out, but I like to check it anyway. With something like this, where you've got a thin chisel, and this is not that thin, but if you were, say, doing a ½ inch or something even smaller, you push it over to the side, and you tighten this one too much, it will pull it over and you won't get a true angle. So always look underneath here at the back and make sure the back of the chisel is flat against the guide. And really what this now comes down to is just the way that the whole machine has been machined, you know, how accurate it is. There's so much you can do yourself. I mean, you can, as I showed you, you can square this bar up to the wheel, you can be careful that you don't wobble this too much while you're trying to cut the edge. But other than that, a lot of it is just down to the engineering or precision of the way it's made, which I would say is not great. It's probably adequate, but it's not great. Now, as the wheel is absorbing the water, the tray is getting more and more empty, so I'm going to put a little bit more in. What I'm going to do is cut the secondary bevel now at 30 degrees, and then I'm going to hone it. I'm just moving it backwards and forwards across the wheel. I'm pulling this slightly forward, not too much so that this distorts, but just enough so it doesn't wobble. It's cutting nicely. I've got some sort of little dings and things on the front edge of this chisel, so that's all got to be removed. Now you can, of course, remove it. and check. You can feel for burr all the way across. What I have here is this is going across quite nicely, and then it sort of takes a dive. The bevel kind of takes a dive down here, and I'm not altogether sure why that is. The only reason I would imagine it's like that is that this edge of the chisel is slightly tipped towards the wheel, which would only be as a result of putting this in this jig, and I've done everything I can to square it up, so I'm not sure what that is. I'm going to have to investigate. I'm just lapping this now on the stone. Let's get the burr off. See how that's flattened the back of that chisel up to here perfectly, which is good. A little bit of paste on here. I think that's pretty good. It's about as sharp as I think that's going to get. Oops. It's nice and sharp. I think that's fine. Now with this bevel here, the secondary bevel, it's not absolutely parallel all the way across. And that was a bit of a problem for me. I wasn't quite sure what to do, and I tried adjusting the jig that holds it. I assumed there might be a way to lift this up, but it's trial and error. There's no way that you can just put this in, clamp it together, put your chisel in and go and get the perfect beveled end. It doesn't work that way with this machine. It's temperamental. You're going to have to fiddle with it. Even though I've set it up as best as I can, it's still not giving me the perfect bevel, and I think it's something to do with the relationship between this and the wheel. Although it's 90 degrees this way, it doesn't seem to be 90 degrees this way, and I put a bit of a shim here to try to take that back a bit, but it's just the way it's manufactured. It isn't manufactured to perfection, let's put it that way. So I'm having a bit more success. I decided by moving the chisel away from the end here, I'm getting a much better result. So I'm going to put a little bit of black on here before I sharpen it, and we'll see how that's working out. Let the wheel turn a couple of times, pick up some water. That seems pretty good. Yeah, that's fine. Just removed all the black. Just careful as you take it out so you don't damage the tip. Doing it just a slight stroke across here. You see how nice that is? That's just cleaned all that up. It must be perfectly flat. And then just a little bit on here, either side. Keeping it flat. I'm rolling it towards the leather. Seems to be all the burr gone. Oh, there's a little bit of burr on the back. That's it. I've got a beautiful edge there. I don't know whether you can see it. I've got this tiny blade that comes out of this plane. I'm just sharpening that up. I'm getting the hang of this again. It's been a while since I did it. I can feel the burr along the back. That piece is done.